Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful live event with Katrina Nannestad live on Zoom. Don't you love a bit of live on Zoom event? We are so excited that you have chosen to come and spend some time with us here tonight. It's our very first Your Kids Next Read author talk event for 2026. And it is also, and this is why, hence, we have the sparkles out. It
I have
is
a bit of
also our
sparkle.
online launch event for the Your Next Read Junior Fiction series, which of course is a massive day, and we are obviously under celebrating in great style because that is what we do. Now, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we meet today, wherever you may be located, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have joined us, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Stories have been shared across this country for thousands of years, and we celebrate that history and tradition. I am Allison Tait. I am also known as A.L. Tait. And if we haven't met, and I do see some very familiar faces here. Hello, everybody. But if we haven't met, I'm the founder or a founder of Your Kids Next Read. I am co host of the Your Kids Next Read podcast, and I am a middle grade author. Tonight, I am very excited to be joined by the two other members of Team Your Kids Next Read. We have Megan Daly, who is going to wave frantically in one corner, and then we have Alison Rushby with her fabulous wallpaper behind her, who is also waving over there. They are here to keep me honest and on track, technically, but really the person who is going to keep me honest and on track is Ra Gardner, who is hiding here in the shadows somewhere. Well, actually, no, she's right in the middle of my screen. And she is going to keep the technology honest and on track, which, let's face it, is the biggest job of the evening. Now, tonight's event has a twofold purpose, as I said, because we are celebrating the launch of the Your Next Read series, which is a project that we as a team, Your Kids Next Read, have been working on with Affirm Press for around 2 years now. There has been an awful lot of toil and trouble and bubble and all sorts going on in the background. And it has now, of course, launched with the first four titles in our Silver series, which I have kind of adorned my bookshelves with at the back here, but I'm not sure if you can see them all. The Silver series is for readers 5 plus. So there will be two further titles in the Silver series out in July this year, and these will be followed by the first four titles in our Gold series for readers 7 plus in October. Next year, however, brace yourselves, for there will be a flood of Your Next Read fabulousness. Such that there will be 34 titles across the two series by the end of 2027. So every single book in this series has one aim. It is to keep kids reading. But more than that, it's designed to make it easier to keep kids reading. We have a series of icons on each book, which I'm just going to hold those up. You see them closely at the back here, helps young readers to identify the elements that they love in a story, and a quiz in the back of each book, which is very fun. I mean, who doesn't love a quiz, right? Which will then help them to spot the next perfect book for them. For the adults in their lives, it's about creating a one-stop shop of quality junior fiction reads and a wide reading experience. And anyone who has listened to our podcast, been in our community, read our newsletter will know that we are all about that wide reading. And you can have confidence that when you select a Your Next Read title, you're getting not only a story that kids will love, but one that builds confidence, literacy, and a love of literature. So we're very excited to watch Your Next Read roll out over the next couple of years. But tonight, my friends, is all about one of our stellar creators, Katrina Nannestad, who is sitting here in the middle of the screen with me. I'm so lucky. Look at me side by side with our books. Look at us. She is a huge favorite in the Your Kids Next Read community. So she probably needs little introduction, but I am going to do it anyway because that's how we roll. So Katrina is a multi-award winning Australian author. Her books include CBCA shortlisted We Are Wolves, The Girl Who Brought Mischief, the Travelling Bookshop series, The Girl, the Dog and the Rider series, the Oliver Grove series, the Red Dirt Diaries series. Like, we could go on and on and on. But of course, her historical novels are the ones that really bring the joy for our middle grade readers in the Your Kids Next Read community: Rabbit Soldier, Angel Thief, Waiting for the Stork, Silver Linings, and All the Beautiful Things. In recent months, Katrina has been very busy. She's released a picture book, A Song for the King. She's produced the first book in the Frances Bloom Junior Fiction series, and a non-fiction book, The Story Writer's Handbook. We are going to talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, I think just this week, is it? Mim and the Frazzled Fruit Farmer, which is book 7.
Yes.
I'm
Yep.
trying to say that fast. I tried that
Yeah.
on the podcast. It didn't go well, which is book 7 in the Traveling Bookshop series. And then, of course, Bart and The Birds, which is illustrated by Cheryl Orsini and one of the 4 launched titles in the Your Next Read Silver series. So welcome, Katrina Nannestad. Katrina is going to do an author talk for us. So she will be sharing some of the secrets and the inspiration and the process behind Bart and the Birds. But before we get to that, I am actually going to drill her. I'm going to sit her on the hot seat, and I'm going to ask those questions for you all. But first of all, how are you, Katrina? I've just
I'm
laid down a massive torrent of words on you. Have you recovered? Will you recover ever from that?
Oh, it's really nice. It's really nice to sit back and have someone else hosting it. It's been a very busy time for me. I've had a very busy day. I've got a very busy couple of weeks ahead of me. So this is just lovely to have someone else in the
In
control
charge. Look at
seat.
me
Yeah.
driving. I'm driving
Yeah.
for her. So side by
That's right.
side, and I am driving. And I have to say, how nice is it to be able to do this without actually even leaving home? Look at us.
I know. Like you finish work and then you just go into the kitchen and make a cup of tea and
Here we are in our
yeah.
sparkles. All right. Now, look, we're going to go back to the beginning because I want you to cast your mind back, a year or two, a couple of books ago, and just tell me how you became an author in the first place. Where did this all start for you?
Oh, it's always a bit hard to say where the start of your writing journey began, but I think really for me, I would say the first part of my writing journey was having a fabulous English teacher in year 11 and 12. And so that's way, way back. But
We
I
are
didn't
going back.
realize at the time, but she was just so passionate about literature that I caught her passion for literature. And I'd always been like a math science student up until that point, and I loved literature after I'd had her for year 11 and 12 and went on to university to study literature. But still, I don't think I ever really thought I'd be an author. What really inspired me to become an author was when I was a teacher. I used to teach primary school, and for me to see just how powerful a story was to bring a whole class full of children together. When you read a story to children, everyone succeeds because they just have to sit and listen and enjoy. And I loved that magic of a story to take us from the classroom all together and go on this new adventure. And I loved the way that adventure would spill out into conversation and other parts of the day, even if it wasn't a core text that you were studying, just the power of story. And I think that's really where my ambition started, to be a part of that story creating magic. So
Beautiful.
that's a long time ago. That's
But
probably,
but I
20,
do
25
love the
years
fact
ago.
that you can still pinpoint that. I love
Yeah,
the fact that you can
yeah,
pinpoint that moment where you started to think, okay, this is such a joyful thing, and I want to be part of this.
yeah.
You write a lot of different things, you write across a lot of different age groups, and have those junior fiction series such as Frances Bloom and the Traveling Bookshop. You're going through to middle grade, which stretches from series such as The Girl, the Dog, and the Writer, which is a big favorite in Your Kids Next Read, through to that award-winning historical fiction. What draws you to explore both the lighter and the more serious ends of writing for children? Because I would say your work does run that gamut. And
Yeah.
how do you fit it all in? How?
Well, I write full time now. I used to teach part time and casually and write too, but now that's my full time job. So I work 5, 6, 7 days a week. That's how I fit it in. I don't think I ever really thought. I don't think I ever really set out to write for middle grade. I always love writing humour and action. I'd like to write the books that I would have liked as a kid, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I didn't, I just always thought I would write funny stories, whether that was adventure or mystery or fantasy or whatever. I love humour. Humour's still my favourite thing to read, and I love sharing that with kids. And I think really the age group is just whatever the story fits into for me. But with the war stories, that was a bit of an accident that I stumbled into writing those.
Really?
Yeah, because I didn't say I would never do that, but I stumbled across an article about the Wolfskinder when I was looking for something else online and just read it out of interest because I didn't know who they were. And I just thought, this is an amazing story. And I'd never heard those stories before, so maybe my readers hadn't. So that made it an exciting thing that I might be sharing something new with my readers as well. And I just mentioned it to my publisher at the time, and she said, "Oh, yeah, great. I'd love to see that story idea when you've got it fully developed." And I thought, oh, well, I'd better develop the story idea. And I just loved it. I loved it so much, the whole process, I learnt so much. But it, yeah, and of course it was a challenge. It was something quite different for me to do. And I think we should always be taking new challenges. Yeah, and it just sort of went on from there. So I never really expected that I would have such a broad audience or such a broad range of books. It's just, yeah, I suppose it's just evolved that way.
So just one of those ideas that wouldn't let you go.
Yeah.
And then of course you got the encouragement to actually go.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes you have those ideas and you think, oh, that is such a great idea for a story. Someone should really write that. And it never it never occurs to you that actually the person who should be doing it is
Yeah.
possibly you.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right. Especially if it's a harder story idea to deal
yeah,
with. It'd be really, you think it'd be good if someone else would write that.
it'd be great if someone
Yeah.
else took the pain of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
outside of the research aspect, which I imagine is quite, intensive with those historicals that you do, is the writing process, the same for your different types of stories? Like, are you starting with a character? Are you starting with a setting? Are you starting, what kind of, where do you begin a story? Like, you've got
Yeah.
the idea. Where do we go
Yeah.
now?
Well, I think the beginning of the story is something different for lots of different stories. For me, anything that sparks an interest or has that sense of excitement, that's the starting point for the story. So it might be, oh, I'd like to write a story about a writer. That, for the girl, the dog, and the writer. I'm so vague. I'm so consumed in my writing when I'm in the thick of writing a book. I thought it would be fun to write a story about an absent-minded writer. So that's where the girl, the dog, and the writer started. And I had lots of different ideas for that ended up evolving into the crime writer there and the crime stories. Whereas the travelling bookshop, it started with the idea of this travelling shop, a hot air balloon that would go wherever the weather took it, and that would be where the shop was needed. With the war stories, of course, it starts with a moment in history, real stories
Yeah.
that excite me. So it's different every time, but the process is pretty much the same, except for the war stories start with months of research. And
Mm.
yeah, but really for me, a story idea, no matter where it begins with a theme, the idea of a bit of transport or a genre, whatever, a story idea always really comes alive for me when I find the great characters who will sit at the center of the story. And for me,
Right.
character development and getting to know my characters before I start writing is the key part of my story process always.
So, if it came to kind of framing your best writing tip for kids, what would it be to kind of like think about your character first, or what would that be? What would be your best writing tip for kids? Let me
I
just put
think
you on
my
the
I
spot
think
with
my
that.
best writing tip for kids actually comes back to something far more simple, and that is to have fun. to I know that sounds really banal, but I
No.
think write about the thing that excites you, which is really what I've just said there. I find that thing that excites me, and that's what's the starting point for the story. But write about the things that interest you and the things you find exciting, because I believe that that's when we will all do our best writing. And if we're having fun, we'll keep doing it, won't we? Like if we're enjoying what we're doing, we'll keep writing. And if we keep writing, we get better and better at writing. And so then that practice makes perfect thing comes in there. So that's probably my simplest writing tip. But I do often, when I do writing workshops with children and adults, I start with character really, and that
Yeah.
is a great point to start. And I would always say, get to know your characters well before you start writing. Don't just sort of bumble into it, but make sure you really know them and like them, because you're going to spend some time with them while you're writing the story.
So, do you have a strict schedule for working on different projects? Like, are you ever working on two at a time, or is it like a strict, like, no, I've got to finish this one first? Because I want to know if that's the case, what you do with those random ideas that pop up when you're in the middle of writing something else and they look better. They're sparkling. That's shiny. They look like not only are they better, they're going to be easier to write than wherever you are right now.
Um, I do have, like, I write to contracts. I've always got deadlines, so I'm always working to a finished date and always meet my deadlines. And the only times I work on multiple things. Like, for instance, if I'm writing something, and then an edit comes through for something, I have to do the edit in a couple of weeks. So then I'm working on another book then. And also the other exception is these long war stories. I might be doing them over a year, and I try to focus on them exclusively for big chunks of time. But then I might have a travelling bookshop to write, or be Bart and the Birds, or something like that in the middle. So then those shorter books, I'll leave the big long one, and then I'll just exclusively write the one book. And what was the other part of that question?
What do you
Oh,
do with,
how do I?
what do you do with the sparkly ideas
Yeah,
then?
I write them down. I've got writing journals, which I'll show you a bit of at the end of my talk, that I put those ideas in. So if I've got an idea, I write it down. Because I've got a terrible memory as well. I'm a bit
Absent-minded.
like the next sparkly idea will come along, and then I will have forgotten that first one. So I write that idea down, and then it is on paper, so I can come back to it later if I want to. But I find that when I'm writing a story, I get so engrossed in it, I don't want to do anything else. I really actually often resent anything else that I have to do while I'm writing a book, because I write by entering fully into the story, and I disappear into that world, and I do become quite absorbed, and probably, if I'm honest, quite self-absorbed. but I live just with a husband who's very tolerant of me, so that's okay.
He doesn't mind cooking, that's fine.
No, he doesn't.
All right, your non-fiction book, The Story Writer's Handbook, Adventures in Creative Writing, is illustrated, of course, by the wonderful Cheryl Orsini, who also illustrated Bee, Bart
Yeah.
and the Birds, and was designed by Astrid Hicks, whose book design work we absolutely love. Like, you could not have come up with a more of a dream team there. And it came out towards the end of 2025. So I guess my first question for you around that is, do you believe every kid can be creative?
I believe everyone can be creative, but I feel like we have different creativity comes in different shapes
Different
and
shapes.
sizes, different
Yep.
forms. And so I've got friends who'll say, "Oh, I'm not at all creative," but they're amazing cooks, and they've got beautiful gardens, and
Yeah.
so we all have those different ways that we are creative. But I also believe that creativity can be learned and can be nurtured. And I think, as far as writing, I think we all have the capacity to come up with some ideas. And if you don't feel like you're someone who can dream up a whole story idea, we can take little baby steps and work our way up. So I do believe creativity is something we learn and nurture and practice, and it becomes easier as we practice it.
Yeah.
Just like the actual skill of writing and spelling and handwriting becomes easier as we practice it. So I would say, if a child doesn't think they're creative, maybe take baby steps. Maybe think about characters. Can you come up with some fun names for characters, or some interesting names for characters? And when you feel like you've mastered that, can you take one of those character names and write a sentence about that character, and then build up in little steps? Because it's like any other thing. It's almost like a skill that the more you do it, the better you get. But we don't pick up a violin and expect to play Mozart, do we? We first of all learn how to hold the
Well,
violin and, pull the bow across. I think a lot of things about writing and creativity are just practice and just, sticking with it.
and you get better at it all the time,
Yeah,
as you
yeah,
say.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So now, of course, you do have, and here we go. I'm going to hold it up again because it's beautiful. You have Bee Bart and the Birds. And I'm hoping that everyone has taken the opportunity to have a look at the book in advance, because otherwise you're going to be racing out, to get it straight after you see the author talk. I'm just saying. But first of all, before we get to that, tell us why you were excited to be part of the Your Next Read series, because you were one of the first people that we approached, and you were like very, very keen right from the beginning, which of course we loved you for. So wonderful for us to know that, the people who we love are also, happy to be part of what we're trying to do here. So tell us why you are excited to be part of that Your Next Read series.
Well, first of all, I really love what you guys do, and I really think you do an amazing job promoting children's literature and Australian authors and illustrators. So I was really happy to be on board with you guys, because I knew that what you would be doing would be for kids and kids literacy and passion for literature. So that was a big part of it. But another thing that I loved was when I talked to Tash about it. You know, at first when I had the first news about it, I thought, oh, I didn't want to be writing something like readers that had really strict limits
Oh
on
yeah, no,
vocabulary and that, because that, I feel like that cramps your style. And
yeah,
that, you know, those books are really important for kids reading, learning,
yeah,
but they're not necessarily what will fascinate and engage children. And so I love the idea that they were meant to be books that would excite children, that they'd be written by a range of authors and illustrators, so there'd be a range of styles, but I also love that they were encouraging children to keep on reading. And I love the whole concept of these little icons on the book, so that if kids loved, like I would have loved this, like animals and comedy, I would have just gone and read all the books with the little animal and comedy, and probably still would actually if they were on adult books. So I just love that concept of making it easy too for kids and teachers and readers to see what suits a kid. You know, I just think it's great. And the other thing I just love, I love the idea that books are almost like, this series to me feels like it's like collectible treasure. You know how kids love collecting Pokemon cards or Barbie dolls or My Little Ponies. I love that this feels like it's something that might be treasure, because books are treasure. And if kids think of books as treasure, they're going to want to read them and read them again. And so I just love the whole concept around it that you developed. I found
great.
it very exciting. And I did ask at the time, and I don't know whether it's okay to compare it to this, but I said, oh, it's like, sounds like Aussie Bites. I just, you know, I was, my kids were little when Aussie Bites and that were out, and they were great series. You know, they weren't as clearly, you know, set out with the icons and that, but I think they were something that parents and teachers felt confident to buy kids, knowing they were written by Australian authors, illustrated by Australian illustrators. So that was sort of something I could sort of connect in my mind, that they were along that sort of line where they'd all be good quality
Brilliant.
books.
Next gen, what can we say?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
we're going to learn more about the Bart and the Birds. You do like those titles that really take a little bit of thought to actually pronounce correctly, don't you? And
I
I'm
like a
going,
bit of alliteration, yeah. Yeah.
you do. So I'm actually going to hand over to you. We are going to put you up on the big screen and for some deeper insights into Be Bart and the Birds, where the idea came from. And I've seen some of this already. So settle back and enjoy, because there are some lovely moments coming your way.
Thank you.
For
That's scary seeing myself up there. I should have brushed my hair a little bit better before I came on. um, I'd like to just start, before I talk about my process of Be Bart and the Birds, to give you a little bit of background to the style and content of my writing and to Be Bart and the Birds. And I think I touched on that before, but I actually didn't like books as a kid. I didn't like reading, and I learnt to read and write because I had to, and you just, you know, went to lessons in school, but I never chose to read and write in my spare time because I was given such incredibly boring books. And I wasn't ever shown the sorts of books that I really would have loved to read and get hooked on. So I really loved comics because they were incredibly colourful. They had really fun stories and often quite quirky characters and a bit of naughtiness. And it wasn't really until my teenage years that I found my way to the kinds of books that I got excited about, books that I wanted to read more of. So, of course, the first thing I really got a bit excited about was reading trashy romance novels, because I got interested in boys. And, you know, how do you find out about boys except by reading Victorian trashy romance? Might explain some of my misunderstanding about, you know, boys and, you know, how they think, and that was my first education there. But then I found my way to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and then my father started handing me war stories, Leon Uris and James Michener, and I loved those. I just got fascinated by all these stories based on real things that had happened to real people, the drama and the excitement and the learning of history that involved. So now when I'm writing for kids, I always try to write the sort of books that I wish I'd been shown as a kid, because I wasn't a keen reader. I think, well, what would I have liked to have read? And so for little Katrina, little 5 to 8 year old Katrina, who's, you know, at the age group that the Silver series is targeted for, I would have loved stories with lots of laughs. I would have liked cute or naughty animals. I would have liked impulsive and quirky children, perhaps even naughty children in stories, and happy, tidy endings. And I also would have liked the text not to be too long and to have lots of pictures, which is why I love why I love this series. That would have really appealed to me as a kid. So that's informed my writing for Bart and the Birds, thinking what would I have liked? What would it have taken to engage me as a little kid who wasn't really that excited by books but would rather read a comic? So Bart and the Birds, the actual story idea there started with a little picture that I drew. So I'm just going to share the screen here. I think that's come up. Is that visible for everyone, the full screen there?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Yeah. So I drew this little picture while I was on hold. I get really bored being on hold, but I think it was the bank or the ATO or something. And I had this horrible music and I had to wait and wait and wait. So I just grabbed the nearest piece of paper and a pencil and started drawing a couple of little kids, and it looked a bit plain. So I started putting birds all over them. And then I drew a cage with a bird in. Then I started writing some names for the kids and the birds. And by the time I got on to whoever I was waiting for on the phone, I had this little piece of paper and I thought, I think that's quite a fun idea for a story. I think there's a seed there for a story. So I actually kept that piece of paper. I did this a few years ago and I put it into my ideas folder. Sorry, I just need to end that screen share. So when I then talked to Tash last year, that's when I pulled this story out again. The thing, I nearly missed out on this series actually when I was talking about, what excited me about the series when I talked to Tash. I nearly didn't talk to Tash. I get a lot of spam email and, people who want to be my agent or want to, share my book with the world and make me a millionaire. And it's just, or it's phishing.
Oh, you get those too? I'm devastated. I thought I was
Yeah.
special.
And so last year, at the beginning of last year, this woman called Tash Besleave was pretending to be a publisher who wanted to share an idea with me, and I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement for her to share it with me. So I just thought, I think I'm probably even reported her as a phishing scam. And I just mentioned it to my agent, and she said, no, that's for real. So thankfully, Tash forgave me and did still talk to me. And I was very excited for the reasons we just shared there, Allison, about the series. And that's when I started going through my ideas folder, looking for something that I thought could be a short story for 5 to 8 year olds. And I pulled out this little picture that I'd drawn of Bart and the Birds, or Janice Marie, she was at the time, but I like a bit of alliteration in my story titles. So then the next thing I do always, once I've got that idea, is I start daydreaming and planning and just spilling all my ideas out onto the page. And, I always plan a story ahead of time. I always, as I said, get to know my characters well, even for a shorter story. The process isn't obviously as long for a short book because I won't forget my ideas halfway through as I might with a long book, like Silver Linings or something. But I did scrawl a few notes. So I just thought I'd share here a couple of my scrawlings that led to the story. So here we've got my first scrawlings about Bart and B, who was originally Janice Marie. And you can see that I always go through certain things with my characters. I think about what's their personality, what do they look like, what do they wear, how do they act? And I always ask what's in my character's pockets, which I know is a really weird thing, but I often come up with good ideas when I
love
wonder
that.
And I think sometimes it really informs the action too, because, you might think, oh, maybe they've got a photo of a long-lost relative or something. And, that then makes you think, oh, well, who is that relative? So I find the pocket thing generates heaps of ideas. But here you can see there's lots of stuff there about B and Bart that never ever made it to the story. And there often is in my planning. There's a lot of stuff that never makes it to the story. But what this does is it helps me to know my characters well, and it gives me the confidence to write the story and to keep going. I also had some ideas for the birds. Not all of those birds made it into the story. And in fact, there are a few ideas there amongst the birds and the kids that I might end up making it to another story because I think they're quite fun ideas. But it helps me to get to know my characters, get to know my supporting characters and the whole story. And I even dreamt up this idea. I had that original cage of punishment in my original picture. And I loved the idea that there would be this cage that would be for the birds to go in, not the kids, goodness, the birds to go in when they were naughty, like if they pecked someone, but it would also be like a pram, a walkies wagon. But in the end, it turned out to just be a beautiful cage that Cheryl Orsini
Look at
illustrated so
that.
beautifully. The kids didn't think the birds should be in a cage, that would be just cruel, but they could use it as a walkies wagon when they go to the park, so they'd be safe while they were out walking. So they're just a couple of my weird little scrawlings.
I love them though. Like even your scrawlings are actually quite stylish because if you looked at my scrawlings, A, you wouldn't be able to read the handwriting, and B, the drawings you would not recognize at all.
Well, I only share the ones that there's recognisable writing and drawing, Alison. There are some pretty rugged things, and
You've
sometimes
redrawn
when
that specially.
I do a lot of what I call exploding ideas. They're really like mind maps or brainstorming, but they're not as organised as mind maps. So I call it exploding ideas, where I just blur everything across the page. I find that a really helpful thing at the starting stage, and then organise those into some sensible plans and that too. But the other thing that really informed this story and influenced this story and also informed the characters of the birds was this little fellow here. Sorry, I shouldn't have gone out of the screen share there. So about 5 years ago, this little fellow Otto came into our lives. He blew out of a tree near our house in a storm and was injured, so he couldn't go, like the foxes would eat him if we left him. So we brought him home and we raised him because we were told wires had too many magpies. He wouldn't be looked after. So we raised him until he was well enough to go back into the wild. And Otto was an absolute joy and a delight. He was lovely, he was sweet, he was hilarious, but he was really naughty and really, really weird as well. So a lot of stuff about Otto really influenced the birds in Bart and the Birds. He was really naughty and really noisy when he was little, really demanding, but he was also weird. Like, I don't know whether it was because he was raised with the dog or what, but he used to like lounge around, and he loved to take the dog's bed. He loved teasing the dog Olive, and Olive reacted really well, like siblings like to tease. And then, if he got in the dog's beanbag, Olive would nudge him, like sort of try to roll him off with her nose, and he would just sort of freeze and tumble and then just freeze there and play dead. It was really, really weird. And other times too, if the dog would, ruffle him up. She never hurt him. She never actually hurt him at all, but she'd ruffle him up when they were arguing, and he'd look like he was half dead or maimed, and then he'd just get up and go after her and tease her again. But this playing dead thing just used to crack us up. He just used to become wooden and roll about when the dog nudged him about. He was also a thief, absolutely loved being on my desk and stealing paper clips and pens and papers. He'd fly down while we were having dinner and steal our food off our plate. He loved to perch in odd places. This is him sitting on my thermos of coffee on my desk, and this is him getting a bit of warmth from the warm dishwashing water in the morning on a cold winter morning. He loved sitting on my head, which was difficult during work hours, and better if he sat on my shoulder. So he used to sit on my shoulder and play with my earrings and sing me love songs. Here's another weird, lying down on my husband's socks and gardening gloves thing. He used to come for walks with us too. He loved being out and about. Wherever we were, he'd be with us. We're walking around the hills or up the lane, and if he got tired, he'd just sit on my head. We even made the front page of the Bendigo magazine, and this bird who loved to be with me and sit on my shoulder perversely decided he didn't want to when there was a photo shoot involved. So I think we fed him about a kilo of mince by the time the photo shoot was over to get him to come back. He was very naughty. So Otto was an absolute delight and a hoot to raise. And when you read Bart and the Birds, you'll probably see elements of Otto in a lot of the birds there. So I've got a Boo, an owl who loves to jump out and scare people. I've got Polly the parrot who never shuts up. She just sings and talks in rhymes night and day. I've got Dawn Owl, a peacock who plays dead, just like Otto did. Squish, a fairy wren who gets beneath people's bottoms as they're sitting and beneath their feet as they're walking. And Rosie the crow, who's a thief. So very much Otto has very much influenced this story. And I had so much fun sort of reliving a lot of my time with Otto. Otto, by the way, did grow up healthy and strong and flew away one day and never came back. So we're hoping he's
Oh,
living a great life among the wild birds. So once I had my plan, B and Bart, and I had my cast of quirky birds, the writing was really easy, and it was lots of fun. And then I had lots of fun again when Cheryl Orsini's illustrations came through. You know, that any time her illustrations arrive is like Christmas. They're so full of joy. And I've worked with her for a number of years now on the Girl, the Dog, the Writer series, the Travelling Bookshop series, the Story Writer's Handbook. And so I was just so excited when she was one of the names that Tash said, would you like this person or Cheryl Orsini to illustrate? And I could just picture what Cheryl would do with the story immediately. So that was so
and the
exciting.
birds.
Yeah, the
She did
bird.
such a great job of creating the personalities within the birds. I
Oh,
just,
she's
yeah,
just amazing. And the funny thing is for me, or the freaky thing, but it's a real gift too, is I feel like she can see what's in my head. Like when her
oh,
illustrations arrive, I think, oh, she's been living in my head, in my imagination. And it was like that from the first picture that I saw of hers, which was the cover for The Girl, the Dog and the Writer in Rome. I just was astonished that I felt like she created what was living in my imagination. And she is so good at embracing the fun, the joy, and the giggles. And her pictures really do bring a story alive. I'm always in awe of just how much information she can put in a picture without making it look crowded or
yeah,
overdone. So
yeah.
that's just wonderful. She's an absolute genius. So I felt really privileged that she would illustrate this book. Um, that's all I'm going to talk about, Bee, Bart and the Birds. But I know that often when people love children's literature, there'll be people among the audience who also like writing children's literature, perhaps people who
Yes.
already do that, or people who aspire to become a children's author. So I thought I'd finish by sharing my top writing tips for adults writing for kids, if that's
That sounds
okay.
excellent.
Yeah.
I'm going to take notes.
So my first hint, which it's probably a bit repetitious now after what I've already shared, is to spend time exploring your ideas before you write. So spend time daydreaming. Allow yourself to let your imagination run wild. Draw pictures, chase ideas across the page, make notes and lists, whatever gets your ideas flying. Spend time doing that. And, no idea is wrong. You can rein your ideas in later. You choose your best ideas later, but spend time daydreaming and taking notes. And then my second point would be to organise your best ideas into some sort of plan. And that doesn't mean you can't deviate from the plan once you start writing. It's wonderful when you start writing and better ideas pop up, or your characters take on a life of their own, and you start chasing after them, really recording what they're doing. That's the magic of writing. But for me, that magic only happens when I've spent a lot of time already with thinking of the ideas, generating ideas, getting to know my story and my characters. So do organise a plan, but don't feel like you can't deviate from the plan. It's not set in stone. I'd also suggest you get in touch with your inner child. And that might sound really obvious, but, we can get a little bit serious about children's literature sometimes, I think. And if we want kids to enjoy the stories we're making, we have to get in touch with our inner child. That little one we used to be, the one that believed anything was possible, or the one that thought ice cream was an important food group, or that blowing bubbles all day long was a valid use of time. Get in touch with your own inner child. Try to remember what it was like for you at the age, at that age group you're writing for. And write for them, and write for the little ones in your life who are still living in that world of whimsy, that world where anything is impossible, that world where we're spontaneous and you act on a momentary thought or on an impulse. And the other thing is a bit attached to that is to have fun. So be playful, be silly, be wildly imaginative. And it doesn't matter if the story gets out of control, that's okay. At the end of the story, you can rein it in. You can edit your story, but don't feel scared to be a bit playful and a bit wild. The editing process is there for a reason. But I
It
think it's better.
certainly is.
Yeah, I think it's better to err on the side of being childish than to be too grown up or too staid, or not get in touch with that fun thing that kids like, or that whatever feelings are appropriate for children at that age. I also think it's valuable, and it's a little bit like the before you start writing thing, but before you write a scene, to actually spend time imagining it, picturing it, putting yourself in that situation. And that's a really simple thing to do, but I think it's a really powerful thing to do, not just to blast in and write things straight away, but to allow yourself a moment to imagine it and play a little movie in your head before you write. I think that makes writing so much easier with every scene. And I would suggest that you read your finished story aloud several times during the editing process. You're laughing, Alison, aren't
No,
you? It's a simple process,
I'm
isn't it?
constantly telling people to do this
Yeah.
because you immediately can hear
Yeah,
where your dialogue's not right and where things are all over the place. And yeah,
exactly. And that's exactly why I recommend it several times. First of all, to make sure your meaning's clear, because when you hear it said out loud, you're right, Alison, you go, well, that dialogue sounds silly or that doesn't make sense. But also, one thing that I think people perhaps don't always consider is that the rhythm and flow of your sentences, even in a really long novel, even in an historical novel that's, 60, 80,000 words long, it matters as much as meaning. So you should make every sentence, every single sentence, even in a long novel, as perfect as possible, because one glitch in your rhythm or your clarity or in the consistency really jars the reader. And what that does is it immediately takes them out of the story. It takes them out of the fantasy of the story. And what we want to do as writers is keep people so engrossed in the story that they're living the story with the characters. And so that's one reason that reading aloud is so powerful as a writer and in the editing process, because it highlights those inconsistencies and where the words catch up because there's too much alliteration or because something's clunky. It might just be a matter of taking a word out of the sentence or something. That's really powerful. And the last thing I would say is practice creativity, which I talked about with kids before, but I think for adults, it's so important. If you're writing for an audience, if you're writing for publication, don't only write when you're writing for a specific purpose, for a specific audience, or with the view to be published. It's really important to practice and to play and experiment and just write for the sake of spilling words on the page, because I think that really what that does is it is practice. It also keeps you really creative. It keeps your imagination whirring. It keeps you alert to story ideas. And sometimes this playing without any pressure, without any end goal in sight, does generate some really great ideas. So I'm just going to finish by showing you a couple of pages from my little writing journals. I always keep little writing journals. I used to just stick things in an ideas folder, but I've gotten a little bit organised over the years. And I just want to show you, these are really silly, but these are part of my writing practice, and they're part of what keeps me playful and in touch with my inner child. So now that should be sharing. So these are just some of my journals. I love travelers' notebooks because you can put new inserts in, but it doesn't matter what your journals are. They can be old school exercise books, loose leaves of paper, whatever. But these are some of my journals that I make or that I buy and write in. And I just play. I just write the first thing that pops into my head. If I have a really silly idea, but it makes me laugh, I put it down. It doesn't matter. Nobody else has to see these except when I'm sharing, like tonight. So for instance, here in my journal, I just stuck in a postcard with a world map and drew some boxes, wrote some story names, and they're just silly, but it's just me letting go and having fun with writing. But I do like the idea of writing a book called Around the World in 80 Cakes. I think
yeah, I
that
was
might
looking
have,
at that one. I'm thinking
yeah,
that's a winner. Yeah.
I think that could actually become something. Sometimes I draw pictures. I drew these three little women and I thought they all looked surprised. So I started writing the things they were saying, far out Brussels sprout. Well, I didn't see that coming. And then I thought, well, what are these women surprised by? So I made a list of things that they would possibly be surprised by. The Queen stepping into their humble little cake shop, a three-legged dog outrunning a cheetah. Doesn't matter. I'm having fun. I'm playing with words. I sometimes put pictures in and write speech bubbles for people. I like putting little slips of paper in pockets and envelopes, and then I'll take one out while I'm waiting at the doctor's or something and write a story starter on it. I love listing names. I love making up names. It's a really fun way to generate ideas, and I've often plucked from those lists of names when I need a character name in a funny story particularly. I write little snippets about those characters, and I just have fun. I just have fun. So here I've got the sign read, "Piranhas are us. See Jock Flame and Rue Pemberley for creative solutions to that difficult person in your life." I really like that, and I think I would like to write that story one day, but I can't work out how I can nicely write that for children yet. It might have to become an adult novel. And, even here I've painted a little person, stuck them on my journal, and just imagine the sort of things they might say. Sometimes when I look at myself in the mirror, I think, "My word, Lulu, you look fabulous today. I hope the world is wearing sunglasses." And so that's just all been fun. But Lulu Fantasia definitely needs to star in her own story one day. So I would
It's very
really encourage.
stylish.
She's a little bit conceited though, too, isn't she?
Do you think she eats cakes? Maybe she can be 80 around the world in
She
80
she might
cakes.
be she might be the one who's around the world in 80 cakes. I'm not sure. That's a good thought. But I would really encourage you to be playful and to just practice creativity and have fun, because once again, as I said before, if you're having fun, I think that's when you'll really do your best writing, and that's when your unique author voice will come out. So
That was
that's it for me.
amazing. I want to move into your journals as a starting point because I just think they're incredible. And as I said, I can't believe how stylish your journals are, because compared to what I got going on over here, they're amazing. And I noticed Alison Rushby was nodding sagely when you were talking about planning and how it's such a good idea, because she is the fan of that in a big way. Now, there's a lot of positive, like everyone is very excited by what you're sharing here and your creativity ideas. And of course, a lot of these and a lot of jumping off points and prompts are in your story writer's handbook, aren't they? You've
Oh,
shared a lot of this sort of the way that
absolutely.
you approach it. So if
Yeah.
you're interested in having another, closer look at what Katrina's doing there it is. Have a
There
look
it
at the
is.
Story Writer's Handbook, Adventures in Creative Writing. Now it's time for your questions. And what I'm getting here in the chat is a lot of "Katrina is amazing. You're fantastic." Not seeing there's a lot of love for Otto. Saw them on the on your social media, looking for questions. Now I know Lucy Gartside had one that was very good, and it was a long, long way back. So I'm going to find that.
It was,
Here it
have
is.
you ever started writing a book and then halfway realized you actually don't really like it anymore?
Oh, I did a lot of that at the start of my writing. I think I had my first book published in 2001, and it was 9 years before my second book got published. And I know that's because I wasn't writing well, but I wrote so much stuff, and often I would get partway through a book and didn't really know what I was doing, so I'd put it aside or toss it out or whatever. But as soon as I realised that you could get a contract for writing, I was so naive. I didn't realise this until my third book, when my publisher said they would like me to write a second or a third Red Dirt Diary. I said, can I just tell you the idea rather than writing the whole first thing first and then getting a rejection, because I'd had a lot of rejections. And they said, yeah, of course you can. So once I knew that I could write to a contract, be contracted before I wrote the book, I really had to make sure I liked the book before I pitched it to them, because once I had the contract, I was obliged to write that book. And I think that's when I really started planning properly too, actually, was because I had to put in a comprehensive plan to get the contract for the book. And so I think that stopped that thing of getting halfway and hating it. And I've never, in any of my contracted books, I've never gotten to that point where I get part way and think, oh, I don't like this. Why did I say I'd write this book? Sometimes I find it hard. I think, oh my goodness, I've set a very difficult task for myself. And I can see Allison Tait laughing there. I think we've all struck that one, but it's not that I haven't liked the story. It's that I've bitten off more than I can chew, but
Yeah.
it's one page at a time, and I get
That's
there.
exactly right. And I think that is something else that you learn. You get halfway through and everything's hard and everything's awful and
Oh,
everything's horrible. But if you just keep pushing past that, you get to another bit where things kind of get
yeah.
going and get good again, don't you? And that is a practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really is. And that's the thing that even when you know that as a writer, I don't know any writer who doesn't get to that point in a book and just go, oh my goodness, this is horrible. It's so boring. It's stupid. It's not working. And you push on past and you don't even know why you thought that by the end of the book. But I think it is part of our part of everyone's
Part of what
process.
we do, part of the fun of it, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and in fact, my advice would be for people when they say, what do you do when you get to that? You just forge on. You just, even if you hate it, you just forge on, because even if it's not perfect, you can go back and fix that part up. But also, you learn so much about yourself and your writing process in writing a story through. And I can just about guarantee by the time you get to the end, you'll be pretty happy with what you've written anyway.
well, you'll be happy to be at the end, if
Yeah,
nothing
that's
else.
right. Or you know for sure it hasn't worked. Yeah.
So Laura, and you did touch on this earlier, but what was your inspiration for the girl, the dog, and the writer? Now you mentioned that it was that absent-minded writer, which is actually you.
Yeah.
So you've
Yeah.
drawn on on yourself for that one.
Yeah, I really like the idea of writing a story about a writer who was maybe a little bit more extreme than me, but I do get very absent-minded when I'm writing, and I put things on the stove to cook and forget about them, and they burn, and I forget what the time is, and it's 8 o'clock at night, and my husband says I've cooked dinner even though I was meant to be cooking dinner, and I talk out loud to myself. I have conversations with my characters, all those things that Tobias Appleby does. So it started with that. And I had actually originally planned to have it a little bit younger age group where he would be living in a cabin and there would be talking animals living with him. But I'd just written the Olive Grove series, so it was too similar to that. So I started to think, well, I needed a kid at the centre of the story. If I was going to have a children's story, I didn't want an adult writer to be the only main character. And so I came up with the idea for a child that would come to live with him because she, for some reason, which turned out that her mother was unwell and Tobias was a childhood friend. So it really evolved, had a number of sort of steps along the way. But I really liked the idea then, if he was a crime writer, that they would go to different places and solve crimes. And I love travelling, and I love the thing of, in a story, talking about places and buildings and people and food and all those things. So that's where the idea came, to have it in a different country, a different city or place each time.
Fantastic.
Yeah, stories are never like it. There's sometimes a story will land fairly formed in your imagination, but most of the time it's a process of just nutting it out and problem solving and remembering your audience, and that it happens quite organically. Yeah.
Karen would like to know what you're reading right now.
I am reading 100 Years of Betty, which
100
is
Years of Betty.
yeah. So it's an Australian book. I can't remember the author, sorry, but it's a current book that I got at the end of last year. And it's about a woman who starts life you start with her as a small child and going through World War II, and then she migrates to Australia. So it's a story that shows the evolving role of women and women's awareness that they can perhaps be liberated from men. But it's also a bit of a ride through English and Australian history too. But it's also a story about this woman's life. So yeah, it's good. I've heard it compared a bit to Lessons in Chemistry, but it's a much broader time span than that.
And Grace would like to know what was your inspiration for the characters when you're writing a book like, We Are Wolves or Waiting for the Storks, which are obviously kicked off with an historical idea.
Yeah.
Where do you then find the characters in those books?
Well, I always think I always just do enough research to think what's the sort of story I want to tell here, because no matter what the issue is or the moment in history, even if I'm focusing down to something like the Wolfskinder or the Lebensborn program, there are still many different possibilities for how I can tell the story. And then once I know what sort of story I want to tell, before I go too far, I come up with the main characters that sit at the centre of my story, because that will inform the way I look at my research and what I pick from my research to be a part of the story as well. So I think about, well, if this is the story I want to tell, what sort of children will be the best characters in there to tell that story? So, for instance, with We Are Wolves, I'd read about all different ages of Wolfskinder who were struggling to survive on their own in East Prussia at the end of the war. And I thought it would be really interesting to show 3 siblings of different ages, so we got the different impact on different children at different ages. So I've got Liesl, who's 11, and she's old enough to be able to be a little bit responsible, but too young for that to be really right that she's responsible. So to see how that affects her, but also she's in charge. Then we've got Otto, who's an impulsive 7-year-old and understands some things, but is unaware, and then we've got little baby Mia. So that was a deliberate choice with those 3 age groups to explore how they would be affected by this really harsh situation. So it's the story that I want to tell. It's what characters are best to represent that story, and then I once I get to know my characters through a series of activities, I then continue with my research and just brings everything alive.
All right, we've only got time for 2 more questions. So one is from Raf. Love your historical fiction books for our upper primary, lower secondary year levels. Your books are on repeat borrowing, yay, especially when I book talk them in my library lessons. Are there any plans for further historical fiction books for this age group?
I have just finished the copy edit for my next war story, which is set in Denmark during World War II. And it will come out in November this year. And I would love to tell you the name, but the name that I loved, Tin Soldier Times, has just, marketing's not excited by it. So we're just going back to the drawing board thinking, what's significant in the book? What can we do that has a bit more pizzazz about it? So yeah, I will tell you what that's called when I know myself what it's officially called, but it will be out in November this year.
Okay, and then the last question from Lily Hill. Do you have a special writing spot or do you write wherever you are? It seems like your notebooks are created everywhere. When you're writing a book, do you sit down in one spot and write?
Yeah, my notebooks are created everywhere, and I usually carry one with me in my handbag, so they are wherever I am at the time when the idea strikes. But I do have a place. I'm sitting right here in my place. I'm sitting at my desk in my study, and I've got a notice board here to my left that I often pin cards up about characters and their details, so I don't change their eye colour or their height or something halfway through the story. And I have everything I need here. I've got, if I need resource books, they'll be sitting on my desks and my bookshelves. And yeah, so, and I actually find it really hard to write anywhere else except at my desk. I come to work at the start of the day and I sit here and I work all day long, and it's my office, it's my working place. I can edit in other places, I can plan and research in other places, but the actual writing, I find it very hard to concentrate unless I have complete silence and everything around me that I need.
That's so funny. I'm exactly the same. I always look at people who write in cafes and just think, how do you do that?
Do you know, I tried once, Alison. I went to
Because it looks good, right?
I went to this lovely cafe in Castlemaine called Das Cafe House, and it's an Austrian coffee shop. And I ordered a cup of coffee, an apple strudel with all this cream, and I had my notebook, and I sat there and drank my coffee and ate the apple strudel and thought, oh, if I'm going to sit here any longer, I'm going to have to order another cup of coffee and another apple strudel. I thought, I can't eat my way through the day. I can't eat so many apple strudels all day and write a sentence, every now and again. So it was a failed exercise for me. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all we have time for tonight. Katrina, thank you. Just thank you so much for your time, for sharing your notebooks, for your journals. I feel like I've really been on an adventure, and I love seeing all the Otto stuff because, we read your story and we were just like, oh, this is just, bonkers. And then now you're telling me it's real.
Yeah.
Or it's based on reality. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, oh, this is fantastic. Thank you very much for coming. If you are new to us, don't forget we have a weekly podcast where we talk about new and old and all the things Australian books all of the time, kids of all ages, bit of quality waffle in there just to keep us all interested. We also have a newsletter and various other bits and pieces. You'll find them all at yourkidsnextread.com.au, where you will also find everything you need to know about the Your Next Read series. Good night. See you next time, because I have another very exciting author talk for you coming in May. There'll be some details around that very soon. But otherwise, we'll see you in the community. If you are in our Facebook group, if you're not, come and say hi. There's lots of great recommendations happening there. And I think a round of applause for Katrina. Fairy claps all round. And thanks so much to everyone for being here with us tonight. It's been so great to see so many faces. Thanks very much for coming. And we will, of course, see you all at the next event or the next thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.